Greetings! Thank you for taking the time to view our FERPA presentation. Whether you're a new faculty member who isn't familiar with FERPA or an existing faculty member that just needs a refresher, this presentation should help you out. FERPA stands for the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, and it's something that you need to be aware of on your very first day of class. So let's say on the first day of your first class ever, you go in and you pass out a sign-in sheet to your students. In this photo here, there is a sign-in sheet that contains the student's name and the student S number. Now, because this is likely going to be your very first task as a faculty member, you need to know that this is not FERPA compliant. The big red light on the previous sign-in sheet was the student's S number. A better approach to protect that sort of confidential information would be to pass out a sign-in sheet that just contains the student's name and a place for their signature. That way, you're making sure that you are protecting education records and any information that's personally identifiable to the student. Now you might ask, what is an education record? An education record is any record maintained by an educational agency or institution that directly relates to a student or students. This record can contain a student's name or information from which the individual student can be personally or individually identified. So basically, FERPA requires you to protect any piece of data or information from which a student can be individually identified. On the first sign-in sheet, the big indicator was the student S number. Student names are generally considered to be directory information, but S numbers are not, and they're used to personally identify students. Okay, now we have the sign-in sheet taken care of, but what about after you give your first quiz when you want to post the student's grades outside of your office? You know you can't use the whole S number, so you decide to use the last 4 digits of the S number. Now you need to know that this is not okay either, because the student could still personally be identified from this information, especially if you keep it in alphabetical order. If you really want to post student grades publicly, you need to assign each student a secret code or a random number and then mix those up in non-alphabetical order when you post the grades. If this seems like too much work, then just don't post the grades outside of your office and wait to give the students their grades in class. So let's say you're in a public place or in class and the student asks about her grade in public on that particular quiz. Now, just because a student publicly discusses his or her grade does not automatically waive the protection of this non-directory information. So just because a student brings it up in a public place does not mean that you are permitted to discuss it in a public place. In a situation like that, you should advise the student that you both should talk privately about the grade. That way, you can ensure that you will not be violating FERPA in any sort of way. So let's say now that it's the end of the semester and you want to give the students their grades on a particular quiz that they took on the last day of class or a final. Now, a really common practice is to leave all of those quizzes and exams out in a box in your office. You cannot do this because other students could come and look at that student information and their grades. Another common practice is to send that student a postcard, to save on postage that has their particular grade on a final exam or something. This is not permissible either because anybody who sees the postcard could see that student's grade, so that's definitely not FERPA compliant. Now, something you can think about doing is sending that student an email. But you should only send that email to a university-issued account. So for example, don't send it to a Yahoo account if you have a university-issued account on hand. You might also consider putting a little disclaimer that says under FERPA, this email is intended only for the student. So let's say you send the student an email with notification of that final grade on that one quiz, and they call you and want to talk to you about the grade. Talking on the phone is a little tricky because you need to make sure that it is definitely the student that you were talking to. You cannot talk to anybody else on the phone unless there's a signed release on file with the registrar's office. Okay, so you have all the grades taken care of and the student passed your class with flying colors, but now they want you to write a letter of recommendation for them. So you want to include that they got an A in your class because that makes them look good to their future boss, right? Wrong. You can't include student grades in that letter of recommendation unless you have a written permission from the student on file that says that you can include student grades. Otherwise, you would be violating FERPA even if it's only to benefit the student by mentioning that they got a good grade in your class. Now, when you're writing that letter of recommendation, you definitely shouldn't talk to other faculty either about the student. Talking to other faculty about the student is not appropriate because you're discussing how they've done in another class, which quite frankly isn't any of your business. You don't have a legitimate educational interest to know how they're doing in other people's classes. So basically, don't talk to any faculty about any students. The best thing to do in this situation is just to write the letter of recommendation for the student based on your own observations. If you have that written level of permission, go ahead and include their grade in your class, but otherwise, just give your best recommendation that you can with just your own personal observations. I know it's hard, especially since you just want to help out the student, but you need to be in compliance with FERPA. All of this FERPA stuff might be making you crazy, and you might just want to say, hey, I'm just trying to help the students here, so what happens if I don't follow it? I mean, is anybody really going to find out and get offended or anything? Can I just, blow it off a little bit? Well, of course you know the answer is definitely no. Remember, FERPA is just meant to help protect students, and this is especially critical for students who might be in an abusive relationship or some other circumstance. Just do your best to keep all information private, and when in doubt, always ask someone in the registrar's office. Or you can ask me. I'm Elise Jones, and I work at the Student Services Office in the System Office. And if you ever have any questions, or you encounter a situation where you're not sure what to do, or you're not sure if you're violating FERPA, please ask. We're definitely here to help you. Good luck in this upcoming semester.